So, welcome back to Afri-CAN. Today, we're experimenting with a different format for our podcast as we have three guests tackling three broad questions. I'm hoping that this will encourage our guests to engage in more spontaneous discussion. As for our subject today, we're focusing on what I would say is one of the most important questions in philanthropy, which is that of measuring impact. Nowadays, it's fair to say that there is no philanthropy without impact assessment. We are all chasing impact. Um, so, how do we go about ascertaining that we philanthropists are indeed doing all the good that we set out to do in the first place? A prerequisite is that we be very clear at the outset of a program's design on what the measurable indicators of its success are. But while most development philanthropists are well intentioned, whether these good intentions end up improving development outcomes is not a foregone conclusion. Much like one could say that the developmental impact of international aid is far from straightforward. As philanthropists, by tracking the results of our programs, we have a responsibility to ensure that what might have been a theoretically sound idea is actually adding value in practice instead of resulting in harmful effects. And that's basic. Beyond that, I think we need to know how large our effect is and to check whether other uses of the same financial resources could have yielded larger results because a philanthropist's financial resources are finite. This is all common sense. But how scientific should be the assessment of impact? How rigorous should we be in our extreme pursuit of evidence in developing country contexts where information extraction might not be straightforward and might even raise ethical concerns? Should we exclude what may seem like a good program just because it cannot be measured as rigorously as we might want? So, whichever way you look at it, the assessment of impact is a complex task. So, today I've invited Pharo Foundation's Chief Research and Evaluation Officer, Ken Lee, who pioneered the Foundation's global monitoring framework and will illustrate how Pharo does impact evaluation. Ken has over a decade experience as a development and environmental economist. Prior to Pharo, he was the director of the Air Quality Life Index and the executive director of the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago in India. Earlier, he was an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. He holds a PhD in development economics from UC Berkeley and additional degrees from Columbia and McGill. He's joined by Fabio Bezerra and Lina Henao. Fabio is the Director of Design, Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability, and Learning at ForAfrika, where he leads evidence generation and learning platforms for impact decisions. He's worked for the past 12 years developing and managing monitoring and evaluation systems in humanitarian and development programs in Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. In Brazil, he led a consultancy, Minds for Development, that worked with NGOs and foundations to design social programs and public policy interventions in the areas of education, culture, and corporate responsibility, aimed at social change through the holistic development of younger generations. He holds degrees in business administration and law from the Federal University of Paraíba and a master's degree in development management and evaluation from the University of Antwerp. Last but not least, Lina leads the Mozambican monitoring, evaluation, and learning agenda of IDE Global. She is an applied economist and a results oriented manager with a 10-year track record of working in rural development and entrepreneurship across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Lina creates systems to measure the outcomes of resilience and entrepreneurship programs and maximize programmatic impact by empowering decision making with evidence. In addition, she's a learning enthusiast, promoting best practice knowledge sharing and participatory, gender sensitive, and ethical evaluation methods. She received a BS and an MA in economics from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota and an MPA in development practice from Columbia University in New York. She's previously worked closely with African governments, designing monitoring and evaluation systems to track development performance. She has vast experience in impact evaluation of poverty policies and rural development programs, cost-benefit analysis, and strategic planning. So let's give it a go and try and answer this big question of how to do impact assessment. So I'll kick off with my first question. And I would like Fabio to speak to it first, then Lina, and then Ken. So who are we measuring impact for, Fabio?
Thanks, Francesca, for the introduction, for the invitation as well to this discussion today. And if a measure of impact is the experience and the CV of the participants, I really hope that we're going to reach a great result with today's conversation.
That's what I thought.
So, who are we measuring impact for? I joined ForAfrika in 2023 at a pivotal moment at the organization. So the organization had just been rebranded from Joint Aid Management to ForAfrika to Thrive. And part of this strategic shift was to incorporate a stronger focus on community transformational development. And this wasn't just a change of name, it really represented a fundamental shift on how we approach our work, including impact measurement. So coming from a long history of humanitarian work, our impact goal is now to support 20 million Africans to become self-sufficient and 6 million to have a platform to thrive by 2032. So of course, with all these changes, we faced similar questions to many development partners right at the onset. So how do we meaningfully measure impact across diverse contexts, from emergency settings in South Sudan, for example, to stable environments in Rwanda? And more importantly, how do we ensure that our measurement approaches actually serve the communities we work, rather than just satisfying donor requirements, for example? So to answer who we're measuring for, that was actually our first goal when we developed the impact system. We came up with three immediate needs, information needs. First, to communities themselves. So people could benefit from more information to understand their own progress towards self-sufficiency and make decisions about their development journey. Communities for us, they really hold the plan A. They are the ones that should drive development. The second group of people is the organization, ForAfrika itself, so that field staff and leadership can use this evidence to improve programming, to allocate resources, as you mentioned, effectively across this continuum from research response all the way to transformational development. And then third, donors and partners in general, so that we can ensure that external stakeholders receive this transparent, reliable information about the difference that their investment is making. So we went about, when we looked at these three different groups, we went about to developing a sustainable livelihoods index. Was the kickstart solution for us, a comprehensive framework that measures 22 indicators across 5 different dimensions of resources and capabilities, ranging from natural, physical, human, financial, all the way to social aspects as well. And now at the second stage, we continue with this quantitative impact monitoring, but we're bringing in qualitative impact protocol. So we're getting the community closer to the measurements framework. And this helps us to incorporate nuances in understanding of self-sufficiency by each community and how they see actually this change happening. So let me stop here, and also I think hear from Lina and Ken, so we can bounce off ideas.
Thank you, Fabio. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear your answer. So for us, let's say that also some years ago, we were seeing who are we measuring impact for, like an intersection between donors and our organization. And we divided it a little bit between the interest of headquarters and the country offices, because sometimes is different. And then we realize we are missing the most important, that is the community, the communities that we serve. So since then, and it's been some years, maybe three, that we embarked in this participatory impact measurement. For this, we did an assessment. We went to the communities that we work with in the 13 countries that we work and asked them, what is important for you, right? Because we always come from this donor reporting mindset, like numbers, scale, how many people train, and then multiply by five because five people live in the household, right? And what we found from the study is that it's different. What the communities value, it's very different from what we think that is important, and what the donor think that is important is not obviously rich, is not even income. Families and households care about health, education, access to energy, water, to electricity, women empowerment. So since then, yes, we still, as Fai said, report on what is important to donors and for us to track what's the progress of our programs. But since then, we are understanding impact at a broader, more participatory level. So we are understanding it as prosperity, and prosperity for the communities that we work means different things. So improvements in health, in education for their kids, wealth understood as assets. And we also work in creating market resilience. So we have the market resilience systems index. So that's also part of our measurement. So from now on, woman empowerment. So we're understanding now as a broader level that goes beyond income and reach on a prosperity perspective. I wish that you guys could see this, but I'll share it. So this is all the things that the community, when we did the assessment, said, and what is important for the communities is different from what we usually do. So it's a change that we are excited to push for. And
Great.
sorry, the last, it's exciting to hear Fabio saying that, because as we try to put and to work in more participatory methods for monitoring and evaluating impact, it's very new. Like the participatory approach, it's very new. There's not that many organizations leading on that, and it's a little bit of a shift in the development work that I think that it's important for us to have these conversations and to push for them.
Very interesting. Um, Ken, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Thanks, Lina and Fabio. That was super interesting. So when I first joined Pharo, I think I had to unlearn and relearn a few things. So I came into this work from academia, and back in those days, the goal was to design applied economic studies to test theory and generate publishable results. So the were we measuring for back then was often an abstract community. It was donors and policymakers, but also the academic community and institutions. And we were primarily looking for generalizable evidence or contributions to a specific field. So for me, it was policy research at the intersection of energy and environment in developing countries. But that changed when I joined Pharo. Here, we fund and operate our own programs in education, water, and productivity. And our research and evaluation work serves a slightly different purpose. Uh, Here, we're, I would say, primarily measuring impact for ourselves, for our leadership team, for our highly engaged founder and board of trustees, and of course for our program teams, and of course the communities as well. But the primary audience is expecting clear, timely, actionable data and evidence. They need to know, is this program helping people learn, earn, contribute to society? Is it delivering on our missions? And so the job of my team here has been to define what success looks like and then build measurement systems that track whether we're getting there. And I think sometimes it's not about perfection, which was the case in academia. It's more about getting the signal we need and fast enough so that we can act on it. And I think one thing that makes this work especially interesting is that we have a board that has a very clear vision of the kinds of impacts they want to create. I think it's centered around youth education and employment. It's centered around investing in value added capacity, things like training centers and factories. And the goal is really to put people to work and solve these big problems. So that type of clarity and vision forces us to think pretty hard about what metrics really reflect progress towards it. It's like, how do you design a signal that tells you if you're hitting the bullseye of that vision, the vision of our founder and our board? And that's where the creativity comes in, which I think is one of the best parts of this job.
Can I ask, like, is there a way to kind of combine, the kind of indicators that, say, our board will be looking to advance with the community specific indicators?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ultimately it is about the community. What I meant was that the primary consumer of the data would be the decision makers within Pharo Foundation. But if the Pharo Foundation cares about driving economic development, economic growth, then ultimately those are data points that you would capture at the community level. You'd do household surveys, you'd capture poverty levels, water access levels, educational attainment, and so on from the community. But the primary consumer is the board. And what I had to relearn at Pharo Foundation is that there's a slight difference between the primary consumer of the intelligence that we create in this group and the academic audience, which is what it came from. And one is much more actionable, whereas the other one might be a bit more abstract or theoretical. um, and they aren't completely overlapped. So that was a learning process for me. And so I think this question of who you're measuring for is very important because it then influences the nature of what you collect and how you collect it and how you decide when enough is enough.
Great. Thank you, guys. Um, okay. If we can move on maybe to next sort of big question for me. Um, maybe Lina can give it a go first, and then Fabio and Ken. Um, the next question for me is, for what decisions are we measuring this impact?
For various decisions. So I guess that the most straightforward is ensuring that the programs are going well, that we are reporting to the donors, ensuring that the money is well channeled. But I think that the most important is ensuring that the work that we're doing is worth it and is relevant to the people that needs to be relevant, right? So that's why again the ensuring that this is participatory and the voice of the people that are being benefited or being served by the work is there. I can give a short example. We work with in agriculture. We teach climate resilient techniques to farmers in different areas, and we were not seeing like our theory of change having impact. Like we are not seeing people adopting those techniques, and we're not seeing people improving their production, and we're not seeing people having more income and being more resilient. Why? We start doing a lot of assessments, adoption, why they're not adopting. We had rates of adoption. And then we realized that it was not because they were not learning or because they didn't want to. It was because they didn't have access to what. So we were being a little bit hypercritical and like teaching things and thinking that we were giving tools and knowledge, and they just didn't have the conditions to apply that. So we found out that almost nobody had access to water. We then shifted the project. Okay, let's bring people to the water. Let's create production hubs, and things change completely. So it's that is the important things to for us to understand if the work is relevant, because we usually, and I think that in development, like this has proven to be working in this place, and if you do this, then the impact proved this, and then you try to apply it with no understanding of for the people, and then it doesn't work. So it's for me it's the importance of making sure that it's relevant to the right people, that at the core is the community.
Brilliant. Fabio?
Sure. It very much aligns to Lina and almost feels like we work in the same organization because we're defining impact as this broad on our side self-sufficiency. Lina is talking about prosperity. We're both looking at this combination, right, of different indicators. And I think for us, primarily at the center of decisions is relevance as well. and the sustainability of these interventions, of these long-term results. So when ForAfrika defined its impact goal around self-sufficiency, it really opened up our understanding that the long-term impact that we want to achieve is to support communities to meet their basic needs with autonomy, with resilience, without external support. And there's no one way, one only correct way, kind of a blueprint, a rubber kind of a stamp solution to arrive at that. So that's why we incorporated these 22 indicators, these 5 different areas of capitals and capabilities, so that communities can have access to different resources. And according to their own choices of combinations of these resources, they themselves can devise their sustainability livelihood strategies, right? So when we're measuring impact from a quantitative perspective, we want to know at which stage are they in terms of access to these resources and capabilities, so that we can bring in relevant solutions to tackle those that are kind of underserved by other partners, by the government, by lack of resources, and so on. But on the other hand, when we bring in the qualitative components, that's where the communities are able to frame and define what the self-sufficiency really means for them, which resources they consider a priority. That allows us to now take that information together with the quantitative parts, and from a methodological point of view, we then attribute different weights to those indicators according to what the community is saying, right? But then from a decision point of view, a decision making, it allows us to now combine the quantitative part with the community feedback and direct resources to really that combination of priority needs. And this is all centered around the idea that for sustainability, communities need to own the solutions. So we have seen development interventions for the past 40 to 60 years around similar areas of work, and very little change in terms of long-term results sometimes. And primarily that has been subject of studies, and what it shows is interventions come and go. They are not aligned to the local resources. They are not allowing communities to carry on with those activities. And it feels like someone walks into your house, decides what you should do, and when they leave, I mean, probably you're going to go back to what you were doing before, right? So unless these solutions are based on the priorities of the communities, there's a big chance that we're going to see setbacks once that project ends. So we measure impact to see if we're getting there, but to see if we're getting there through the correct means as well, addressing those root causes and aligning to the definition of communities around what success really means to them. Just to show a bit of an example as well, when we implemented this new impact framework in 24, and we did our baseline. We did a research in 6 countries of our operations, 2,500 households. And when we analyzed all this data together, we saw that from the quantitative perspective in analysis, we saw in South Sudan only 1.5% of the households being considered self-sufficient, while in South Africa, we reach 46.5% of the households in areas where we work. So this alone shows us that there is a huge diversity in context in the places where we work. And this then requires also a diversity of solutions, of approaches. So it really allows us to pinpoint priority areas to accelerate development, but also to identify key barriers that keep holding communities down.
I love it, Fabio. It's an amazing sort of model you've created here for impact. A very agile one, it seems to me. Um, very relevant. Um, Ken, your views.
Yeah, I just want to agree with the others on the call that everything you're saying resonates very much with me. So it's quite interesting to learn of your experiences. At Pharo, I'd say the main use case of impact data and just data more broadly is operational decision making. So we're often trying to answer questions like, should we continue and scale up a particular program? Is it achieving its intended goals, or should we reallocate resources? So in most cases, we're looking for data that can feed into real-time dashboards and not necessarily be the foundation for a high-profile academic paper. And sometimes that means carefully tracking a focused set of key performance indicators and then using existing research to infer the kinds of impacts that we might expect, assuming strong implementation. And a large part of our global monitoring framework, which is our internal monitoring evaluation system, is built around that logic. We run a broad range of programs, and sometimes RCTs, which are randomized control trials, aren't always feasible since they are so resource intensive. Um, that said, we also love academic rigor, and sometimes when you run studies in that way, it builds and generates credibility. And then, so in some cases, we're trying to do those types of things as well. Take, for instance, in Somaliland, we're running a randomized control trial of a year-long early childhood education program in Hargeisa public schools. Right, so we ran a lottery that determined admissions and placements into the school program. We measured early childhood development outcomes pre and post the program. We measured huge impacts and gains, and in this case, that's one of the first studies of its kind in the country. Like, very few researchers have been interested in or able to pull off an experimental evaluation in that way. And in that case, we are hoping to publish that as a paper. So to bring this together, I'd say at Pharo Foundation, we try our best to emphasize a tight link between what we measure and the specific decisions that we need to make with that information.
Excellent. Um, okay, so moving on to our last question. Maybe we start with Ken and then have Lina and finally Fabio. Um, how would you say we get people to care about the impact assessments that we generate?
Um, yeah, so this is the question that I think is super important. In February, in the days following the shutdown of USAID, there was a lot of debate on social media about whether international development was even worth funding. People were asking some pretty fundamental questions like, what's the point of this? And apologies, I was just going to tell this story. But I remember watching Samantha Power, who was the former administrator of USAID, on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And I thought she gave really one of the clearest and most compelling arguments I've heard for why international aid matters. Of course, from the perspective of the United States. And her basic point was that development isn't just a humanitarian obligation, but also a strategic long-term investment in global stability and security. And in many cases, it's more cost effective than military investment and intervention. And that struck me as a story that should have resonated across the political spectrum. And yet, watching the show, I couldn't help but feel that, like, most people, or maybe just the average person tuning into that show in the United States, had no idea what international development was about, what USAID was for, why it was created, what people in the space actually do. And that led to a pretty uncomfortable realization, which is that I think we in the policy research space in international development just haven't told our story very well. We've been so focused on measuring outcomes, running evaluations, getting things published in obscure academic journals that maybe only a handful of people will read. And we could have all done so much more in helping people understand why this work matters. I thought about this joke that I would often tell my friends in grad school, which is like, how would you explain to grandma like what we're doing and why I'm in Kenya? And and it's a really important question. So I think if we want people to care about impact assessments and data, we have to be better communicators. Not talking about like just hyping things up for no reason, but just clear, honest storytelling. We need to explain in very human terms, like what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, and most importantly, why it matters. And I think credible, rigorous evidence is what gives these stories weight. It's what makes people trust that the results we're claiming are true and worth paying attention to. And um, so yeah, I think data matters, but equally important is the storytelling.
Yeah, Lina.
Well, yes, we are agreeing so much. Yes, as Ken said, I think that the sector has tend to give more importance and credibility to numbers that, of course, are super important. For as we just ran a quasi-experimental evaluation in one of our projects, and we were able to prove statistically with significance that we reduce poverty levels by 15 percentage points, and that has given us so much credit because we are able to prove that. But the point is that that has a story behind, and that is like it could never be forgotten. Like there's always stories behind the numbers, and like that poverty reduction came from people feeling these things and people being able to do these other things. So it's, I think that this care comes from being able to triangulate the quantitative part with the qualitative, and knowing that the qualitative is the foundation, and it's with the people that we are serving. We have this image that is an iceberg, and beneath the water, it's the iceberg, and it's like the explicit knowledge, right? That it's all these impact evaluations, all documents, data sets, numbers, reports, like the normal things like know what. But when it's below the iceberg is the tacit knowledge, that is the know-how, that it's experiences, values, religion, cultural traditions, and it's when you start considering those where innovation and creativity and structural change comes from. So I think that giving importance to that part of knowledge that it's not usual in our sector, it's how we can be able to make people to care more about the impact that we are creating.
Very much the same wavelength there, I think, with Ken. Um, Fabio, do you agree?
I fully agree. I cannot deviate much, I think, from the arguments that were shared
Gosh, I
already.
wanted you guys to argue with each other.
Maybe let me and one
Controversial, Fabio.
another layer of complexity as well. So for Africa has been working for 40 years, right, in humanitarian development sector. This has taught us a lot. One thing to resonate with what Ken was saying, our CEO is constantly reminds us about this power of one, the power of changing one life. And it gets really incredible to us when we think about changing 20 million African lives by 2032. And the value of one really symbolizes to us the humanity in every development story. And impact in that sense can only mean something if it tells this human story. So that's why we try to blend complexity of the quantitative index with a qualitative narrative and really present this impact evidence with success stories that illustrate the change. I think getting the heart as an entry point to people is really key here, so that they can relate first, and then they can look at the numbers and understand what does it mean on other spheres. On a more pragmatic basis, I think we also understand that a measurement needs to be useful, right, for it to be accepted by people. So attaching the impact assessments to an intrinsic value for those stakeholders is also something we look at. Internally for the organization, it can mean really showing each and everyone's staff how much change their day-to-day work is contributing to. We're talking about people working in for 20, 30 years in complex crisis, working with complex problems. You're working to increase economic empowerment, but then you're hit with a cholera outbreak or a conflict or something. And sometimes this can make you kind of get lost in the complexity, and you need some kind of North Star or an indication that you are progressing, towards that success, towards a goal. So impact measurements can be a critical tool for that, kind of a grounding us and attaching this value to the work that we do. And the same rationale applies to partners as well, right? So with such broad approaches, like Lina was saying, they do at IDE, like we do with self-sufficiency at ForAfrika, there's always a way to find components in that broad view of impact to align to a donor or to a partner strategy and tell this success story in line with their ambitions as well. So I think we have multiple entry points, but I think the heart is still the most effective and the initial one for us to tell the story.
Wow, I can't think of a better way to finish a discussion on impact than to end with the heart. This has been a very rich discussion, quasi-philosophical, really. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been fantastic. In our next episode, we'll be looking at how we can educate the youth in a way that makes them critical thinkers, who can approach global phenomena from the unique perspective that is given to them by their local traditions. So very different agenda next time, but yeah, it's been fantastic, guys. Thank you so much all for.
Thank you very much as well.
Thanks, Francesca.
Thanks for having
Marco.
us.
You're welcome.